Hey guys, welcome back. Today we'll be talking about 5 things they don't tell you about being a junior doctor. And it has definitely been a shock, and I feel like I've learned so much. I came out of med school thinking I was, ready to take on the world. I was a freshly qualified doctor, and you finally become a junior doctor and you realize there's so many things that no one has told you about. What does this do? What does that do? How do I do that? Oh, I didn't know I had to do that. Honestly, there's no beating around the bush. Being a junior doctor is hard. You're literally the bottom of the food chain, the lowest ranked doctor, being fed off by all the nurses, all the physios, by the occupational therapists. Everyone's turning for you. When there's a problem on the ward, there's a sick patient on the ward, nurses will always call you first, and then it's your responsibility to either sort them out or to escalate. And I think that medical school prepares you really well for knowing this condition and knowing that drug, but what it doesn't prepare you for is being a junior doctor, actually doing the job and actually working on the wards. You definitely learn a lot while you're working. It's almost like you're driving a car. You sort of learn while you're driving, you make some mistakes along the way, but you've got someone on the side to coach you. And in that case for junior doctors, that would be our colleagues, our senior doctors, our consultants. A lot of the stuff though, you do sort of find out on your own, and the medical school definitely does not prepare you for how to be a junior doctor. So here are the 5 most important things that I wish I knew before I became a junior doctor. Number 1, normal working hours do not apply. Junior doctors have to work a lot of out-of-hours shifts. Some night shifts, some day shifts. Some of our shifts end at 10:30, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Some shifts just run from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. But this obviously depends on which hospital you're working for and which specialty you're working for. For example, while I was on medicine this year, I didn't have any night shifts, but I did have quite a lot of shifts on call that I'd finish at 9:30. Versus when I was on surgery, shifts that was 8 to 8:30 p.m. as well as some night shifts that was overnight, staying at the hospital. Essentially, if you think that being a junior doctor will just be an easy 9-to-5 job, you probably will be quite surprised. There are a lot of extra hours that come into being a junior doctor, more so than just what they write, including all the extra hours and night shifts and the twilight shifts. Actually, most days after work, when I'm supposed to be done, something always comes up or something is always unfinished, and I end up having to stay an extra half an hour, an extra hour, and these seems to be quite common practice for most junior doctors around the area that I work. And honestly, it's sort of an expectation as a junior doctor that you are expected to mop up the jobs on the wards and ensure that everything is ready for tomorrow morning, such as printing blood forms, such as making the list ready for the consultant to see tomorrow. Also, if something goes wrong in the afternoon, say 4:30, you have to be the one to be there to take care of the patient. Make sure that they get adequate senior help. Call whoever you need. For example, if the patient is really sick, you might want to refer to intensive care unit. You might want to call the medical or surgical registrar, escalate to a more senior doctor than you. And it's a great learning experience where you can actually get a lot out of it because you're spending so much time at the hospital, but it can be quite tiring. Sometimes when you get back from work about 6, 7, 8 o'clock and you're just absolutely knackered, you ask yourself, is it really worth it? I think it's worth it, and I think you learn so much, but it's not easy. The culture in medicine, even beyond being a junior doctor, is that you're expected to complete all your work in time before the end of the day. And I think that's quite reasonable. However, when your ward is short-staffed by 1 or 2 people, or you're the only doctor looking after half the bays in the ward, sometimes the workload just becomes quite unmanageable to finish within normal working hours, so you just have to stay behind and do the work. In medical school, they tell you that being a junior doctor and your foundation years is going to be tough, but they don't quite tell you how tough it really is, nor how much time you're actually going to work. I actually just spoke to a friend who jotted down his extra working hours from the entire of last year, his foundation F1 year, and he calculated that he'd worked an extra month beyond what he was actually getting paid, so that's just an idea for how much extra work you're going to be doing. Point 2. There's always someone who knows more than you. Medicine is an extremely steep learning curve. And when you think you've just graduated from medical school, you've just passed finals, it seems like you know it all. You've just finished reading this book, that book, you've passed your exam, and you've finally graduated as a doctor. You start at the bottom of the food chain. You are working with nurses, with occupational therapists, physios who've been doing this for years, who are looking after patients and really know what is best for the patient. And you're working with doctors a year, 2 years, 10 years above you who have been looking after patients for much longer than you have, probably know each condition inside out 10 times better than you do. And they just simply have more clinical experience. And honestly, I think this part is irreplaceable because there's only so much you can learn from a textbook. Seeing a patient is a completely different thing entirely. And being able to recognize clinical signs and piece them all together That thing takes time and it takes experience. The amazing thing on medicine though is that everyone is so willing to teach and everyone is so kind. I remember starting my first job on geriatric medicine in my hospital, and I was terrified, but my seniors were really supportive. They gave me any information I needed. They answered all my questions, and it really allows you to develop your skills as a doctor clinically and also informatively. For fellow junior doctors, you might have graduated top of your high school with straight A stars, but once you get into medical school, I'm pretty sure any of you in that situation will realize people are damn smart. And I think the same thing applies for when you finally start working as a doctor. You meet a lot of insanely intelligent people. Don't see it as competition, but see it rather as a synergistic relationship where you can bounce ideas off each other. Everyone around you is going to be insanely smart, but don't discredit yourself because you're in the same position as them. So believe in yourself, but be humble and make the most of all your learning experiences, and that will make you a better doctor. Point number 3, the number of times that you need to move around as a doctor. While you're in your training, not just when you're in your foundation years, but also in your training years, unless you have some special circumstance, you're basically going to be relocating to hospital every half year, every 1 year. And that means entirely displacing yourself, having to move from one hospital in one area to another, but not necessarily within one city, from one hospital to another. It can be two entirely different places. On one hand, it's great because you're working in a new hospital every 1 or 2 years and you're going to meet so many different people who can give you so much perspective. You're working in a different demographic, so you'll be seeing different sorts of patients and different diseases that will make you a more complete and more exposed doctor. But like I said, when you're in your 30s and you just want to settle somewhere, you want to let your kids go to school, the last thing you want to do is to uproot them from where they are, move them somewhere else, let them be comfortable, and then do it again the next year. It's more of a logistical thing that they never really tell you as a medical student or even when you're applying. And the training pathway is quite strict as well. So there are 2 years of foundation training, and depending on which specialty you want to do, from family medicine to some complex surgery or general medicine, training after that initial 2 years can be anything from 3 years to 7 or 8 years. So we're talking an entire decade of your life. When you are 25, 30, that's a large chunk of your life that you still have to plan for. And how does anyone know what they're going to be doing in 10 years or who you're going to be with or where you want to settle, you know? You have to start making these plans while you're young. And it's really difficult when you're a doctor that has to move around every year, that has to reapply for training and they don't know where they're going to get into. So a lot of logistics that they never tell you that are really important. Number 4, junior doctor life is literally just the beginning. You get into medical school, you think you're amazing, you've just finished high school, graduated with straight A's, you plow through medical school and it's tough, but you finish finals, you pass, you think, woohoo, you've made it, and you finally graduate as a doctor, and then you realize it all is just starting now. The training to become a fully qualified specialist doctor is so long, and as I mentioned earlier, after your initial 2 years of foundation training, it can range between anywhere from 3 to 8 years or even longer, because some specialties require you to do fellowship training, some will ask you to do a PhD, some might ask you to do some training outside the country. We're talking about a good decade if you want to be a specialist doctor. Not to mention all the obstacles from right after you graduate medical school to actually becoming the specialist or working as the doctor of your specialty choice. As you're finishing medical school, there's an application which you have to pick your location of where you want to work and the jobs that you want, and you get allocated based on some rankings and your exam results, and then you get matched into a junior doctor post. After your first 2 foundation years, you then have to reapply into the specialty that you're training, just a broad category of surgery, medicine, family medicine, GP, or something more specific, which can run from anywhere between 2 to 3 years. After which you then have to pick the specialty that you want. So for example, if you wanted to do cardiology or a subspecialty of that, you would go into foundation years after medical school, do 2 years, apply for internal medical training, of which that takes 3 years, and then you would have to reapply for cardiology, and then you would subspecialize along the way. So everywhere along the way there are barriers and obstacles. There are interviews, there are applications, so the obstacles never really stop until you finish your training, and that's a whole decade away. It can also be really stressful because not everyone gets a job. Some jobs are quite competitive, some specialties are oversubscribed, and when people have finished medical school, they've done exams, they've finished 2, 4 or 5 years of training, and then they finally get to where they want to be and they get told there's no more spots left this year. People get really discouraged and really stressed, and it can be really tough. But that's just medicine, and that's how competitive some places are, really. Not to mention the exams. There are so many exams left, and if you think that high school, GCSEs, A-levels, you think that medical school, if you think that was all it, you are in for a treat, because it never stops. Not at least until you completely finish your training. To get into a specialty, a lot of different colleges, and colleges are essentially a fancy name that we call for the society that overlooks that specialty. But in order to get into that specialty, you will have had to have done some membership exams. So for surgery, that's the MRCS. For medicine, that's the MRCP, and that's what I'm taking now because I want to go down the medical route. Just to get into the specialty training that you want to do, you need to have finished MRCP Part 1, MRCP Part 2, and PACES, all three of which are very different exams and all very difficult, which means that after medical school, you'll be studying for exams for at least a good number of years after that. When you get into your specialty, the college expects you to take some fellowship exams to become a specialist doctor in that respective specialty, and those are a different ballpark in themselves. Obviously, there are exceptions with certain specialties that need different exams. For example, anesthetics doesn't have any membership exams. All their exams are fellowship exams, but there is so much revision left after medical school. Finally, and probably the most important one to me, medicine and being a junior doctor comes with a lot of emotion. I've been on ICU the last couple months, and even on surgery and medicine before that though, where people have been really sick, on the brink of death. Nothing hurts more than losing a loved one or losing something that you care about. And even though as a junior doctor, you only know that patient for a short amount of time, it doesn't get any easier. But it's hard not to get attached to patients that you care for so dearly. We are very privileged as junior doctors to see life in its purest form. Death, life, happiness, sadness. It almost gives you perspective on other things such as money, the economy, politics, and it makes you question, why does this matter? Why do we do what we do? Why can't people just be happy? And it makes you appreciate things in your life. Medical school doesn't really teach you how to deal with death or life or your emotions. I'm not sure anything else really can. It's more just a coping mechanism that you have to develop over time. Death in particular is something that no one can teach you how to prepare for. I think it's a very difficult thing to wrap your head around mentally. As junior doctors, you'll be asked to do the death verifications and fill in the cremation forms for the patient, as well as inspecting the body. There's a quote that I think about when I'm managing a dying patient or I'm dealing with death, that is, the only thing that is inevitable in your life is death. And I guess it's something that goes against all that we work for as doctors. Our jobs essentially are to try and keep the patient alive, to try and help them. When a patient doesn't make it, for whatever reason, it can be something that's really hard to wrap your head around. You're wondering whether there was something else you could do, whether you made any mistakes, whether you should have spoken to someone else sooner, whether you should have done this or that or given them this medication. Death as a junior doctor, especially when you're first getting started, was the most difficult thing for me, but it was also the thing that gave me the most perspective. You learn that death is not always a bad thing. Some patients have suffered for so many years, they've been alone, they've been sad. Sometimes all they want is some relief from their pain. I know it's a grey area morally, but I guess I just wanted to touch on that fact. Death is not easy to cope with, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a patient, whether it's someone you knew or didn't know. Everyone copes slightly differently, and I don't think medical school or anyone else can tell you how to deal with your emotions and how you deal with that at the end of the day. Everyone finds different ways of coping with their emotions in the same way that you deal with stress. For me, I come back after work and I speak to my colleagues about it, or I go for a run, I go to the gym. I will generally think about it a little just to see whether there's anything I can improve on myself or the things that I did. But at the end of the day, for the sake of your next patients, you need to make sure that you're fresh and you're able to start again and you don't have anything tying you down that would compromise the care that you give to your patients tomorrow. In that sense, I care and I compartmentalize and I keep that memory in my head to reflect. And on that note, that is the end of the video. Honestly, there are so many things about being a junior doctor that I wouldn't have even thought about until this year. I probably can't even put them all in one video, but I thought I'd highlight the most important things. Being a junior doctor is hard for a number of reasons, and medical school doesn't really prepare you for a lot of things. It's just something that you have to learn over time and over the job. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you want to follow my journey, please subscribe down below. See you guys in the next video.